Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a list of, I don't know, how many have we got here? 15 composers who deserve a comeback. Now, many of you have asked me to do something like this, and this talk is really in the way of a summary, because many of these composers I've talked about, many of them have already received videos. So if you find a name in here that interests you, you can do a quick search and come up with some of the videos I've done on these people, or you can simply look at the playlist, the Great Neglected Composers and Works playlist, which has tons of stuff in it, because there's far more neglected great classical music than there is not neglected great classical music. There really is. I mean, it's astonishing how much wonderful music that's out there, and the reason we know this is because thank God, in the past few decades, the recording industry has just exploded with all kinds of unusual and interesting repertoire that we've had an opportunity to listen to and enjoy. And so we're beginning to create what you might call the shadow classics, the alternate canon of great classical composers. And here is my list. It's down below, so you can take a look there, and you can search through, my 1,700 or so videos to date, and see what I've said about some of these people. Actually, some of them I haven't done yet, so it will be interesting. And some I will be doing. So there's a little retrospective and a little future anticipation of what may be happening. Here we go. You ready? The 15. First, Johann Fensel Kalivoda, who I have talked about a few times, and I did a couple videos on his symphonies and his overtures and his string quartets, which are marvelous. Kalivoda lived, let's do the dates, because I put the dates in with all of these guys, so you have a sense of what period and style they're working in. 1801 to 1866. He was an extremely highly regarded composer in his lifetime. He wrote 7 symphonies, 3 really fabulous, 3 string quartets. They're just wonderful. And an absolutely wonderful set of 24 concert overtures, which somebody should record, like the whole series. It would all fit on, say 3 or 4 discs. It would really be fun to do. They're beautiful works. He was Czech. His music sounds Czech quite often. And, Schumann stole from his first symphony and the scherzo of his 4th symphony. I mean, he was a really good composer. Does not deserve his neglect, but but the kind of music he wrote was a little bit too limited by time and place, in the sense that after the 7 symphonies he didn't write lots of big works. He tended to write smaller pieces, those concert shtuck-like things, for all kinds of instruments that are only 10-15 minutes long, mini concertos, things like that. Stuff that nobody pays attention to these days, but that doesn't mean it isn't good music. So give that a shot and see what you think. He's really good. Next, still from the Czech lands, Franz Krommer. Now, Cromer was a Mozart contemporary. I mean, his dates are, and Beethoven too, his dates are 1759 to 1831. He wrote, he's famous now for his wind music. All the Czech composers wrote fabulous wind music. His octet partitas and things. They're really, really beautiful. And that they are what kept his name, before the public to the extent that it is. But his symphonies are also really good, and they're on the cusp of romanticism, and they don't sound like Beethoven or anybody else, and they've been recorded, and quite well. So CPO has them. Chandos did some of them. They're really, really nice. He was actually, although he's famous for his wind music, he was a violinist, and he wrote something like 90 string quartets, all of which are waiting to be explored. Almost all of them. The ones that have been explored by not great string quartets. I mean, one of the problems with this is that you don't want to have second-rate performances of unusual music. You want first-rate performances to show that it's first-rate music, or if it's second-rate music, to make it sound better than it really is. But Cromer was a really good composer, so he's somebody to take a look at. Next, we're going to jump around a lot, by the way. I'm not doing this in any special order until we get to the very end, when I have my favorite choice. William Grant Still, 1895 to 1978. I mean, he lived a good life, a long life. He wrote a couple of 100 pieces, 5 symphonies, ballets, tone poems, chamber works, you name it. He is considered to be the dean of African American composers, which means that he can be safely ignored once that's acknowledged. And that is so freaking unfair. I mean, he's really, really a delightful composer. He had his own style. It sounds a little bit Gershwin-esque. It's a mixture of African American, folk influence and jazz and popular music idioms and classical idioms, and it's a perfectly successful amalgamation of them. His symphonies are interesting. They may not represent him quite at his best. He may have been better at freeform sort of composition, but he was good. His music is good. I've not heard anything by him that hasn't been good and worth listening to. And he deserves just to enter the repertoire and be played as part of normal life, not as the dean of African American composers. He's just a good composer, period. So still is somebody, and there's a lot of music out there you can listen to. Just get some of the Naxos stuff, listen to it and enjoy it. It's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. I played all the symphonies as road music driving back and forth to Connecticut, and they worked beautifully, absolutely beautifully. Next, Michael Haydn, the brother of Joseph Haydn. Well, obviously, being the brother of a big guy is a problem. It really is. He was completely overshadowed by his brother. His expertise was in church music, which also isn't going to win anybody any awards. But he wrote beautiful masses and other, Latin choral works because he was in Salzburg. He got Mozart's job. When Mozart was kicked out by the Archbishop of Salzburg, they got Michael Haydn. And even Joseph acknowledged that Michael was an absolute master in writing religious music. He was probably one of the great composers of the classical period, writing masses and other things like that. And they're very, very beautiful. But he also wrote 30-some-odd symphonies, and he wrote serenades, and that's all this stuff has been recorded. CPO has all the symphonies. There's a big, brilliant classics box of stuff. We're still coming to grips with the choral music because that takes more work, but it's getting published. And I have scores for lots of these pieces, and they are beautiful. Extremely beautiful, and he deserves to be looked into. I don't think he was as formally adventurous or as interesting as his brother. I think his style was somewhat dependent on his brother, who was a few years older. But, it would be so interesting if the history were revised and we saw them as a pair. The Haydn brothers, because they were really good, like the Bach family. Nobody thinks of the Haydns as a family of composers. Well, because there were two of them, but they were, and good ones. So Michael Haydn definitely deserves a break. I think he really does. Next, his dates, by the way, 1737 to 1806. His older brother outlived him by a few years. Next, York Bowen, British composer. Bowen just has come into his own again. He was quite popular in his lifetime. He lived from 1884 to 1961. He was a wonderful keyboard writer, a really great writer for the piano. And his piano music has only started being recorded by British labels, Chandos and Hyperion, and everything I've heard has been good. Not every performance has been good, but the music is good. And he wrote sonatas and character pieces and all that. He also wrote symphonies. He wrote lovely piano concertos. There's a lot. He wrote a terrific viola concerto that's been recorded. There's some really great stuff out there. And he deserves to be part of the normal repertoire. I remember when I first heard him, and I thought to myself, oh, goodness, there's a guy who really, really knows how to exploit the piano and can write beautifully for the instrument. And that's, everybody writes for the piano, of course. You just sort of have to. But to really have that feeling for the instrument and the idiom and what sounds like it's right, Bowen really was one of those guys. Chopin-esque, you might want to say, and then its naturalness. So I would really suggest that you grab some York Bowen on Hyperion or one of those labels or Chandos and just give him a listen. You're going to really, really enjoy this music. It's first class. He was a romantic, with some, a little bit of a modern edge, a 20th century composer, recognizably. Part of that, British English musical renaissance, and he doesn't deserve to be ignored. He does not. He should be in the program of major pianists. He should be in the repertoire. It's very rewarding music. I mean, audience would love it. Pianists love to play it. It's just good stuff. So after York Bowen, jumping back, Anton Reicha. Yeah. 1770 to 1836. Now, Reicha is famous because he invented the woodwind quintet and wrote 20 some odd of them. And they're marvelous, just marvelous pieces. But the invention of the woodwind quintet has pigeonholed him as a 20-shot wonder, basically. No one cares about his other music. But he was a teacher of Berlioz. He was an enormously experimental, quirky figure in Parisian musical life. He was a friend of Beethoven, but he wound up at the Paris Conservatory. And his music, it's all over the place. He liked to do strange-sounding fugues, for example. He wrote a whole, treatise on the new fugue, which nobody paid attention to and everybody thought was wrong because it wasn't like the old fugue. He did a wonderful overture that's in like 7/8 time. He liked unusual meters, possibly a result of his Czech heritage. And so he tended to do things in his piano pieces and these encyclopedic works like L'Art du Varier, the art of the variation. It's fascinating, experimental, quirky music. And of course, experimental in the, early decades of the 19th century, in the 18-somethings, it isn't hard to listen to. It's just different, and in a good way. And he was really, I just think he's one of the most interesting figures of his period. And his music is ceaselessly interesting, and I've done some talks about it, particularly his Quatuor Scientifique, his scientific string quartet that has fugues and things and stuff. And it's amazing. It's just, I can't even describe it. It's so quirky and so original, and just full of personality. Reicha's a guy you really ought to get to know, and his piano music has been getting some attention too, with a couple of series, one on I think Piano Classics or Toccata, one of those labels, and the other on Chandos, and they are fascinating works, definitely worth your time, trouble and time and attention and all that stuff. So Reicha's a character. Next, let's see, Johann Halverson, 1864 to 1935. Now, Halverson was the logical successor to Grieg. If you were wondering what should happen after Grieg, go for Halverson. He wrote a lot of incidental music, so there's some wonderful theatrical pieces. He wrote a bunch of symphonies, 3 or 4 of them, I think, and they're excellent works. 3 symphonies, I believe. They are excellent works. There's a series of his orchestral music on Chandos that's first class. No reason not to listen to this guy. It's beautiful romantic nationalist music. And if you're worried about the fact that Grieg didn't write works in large forms, listen to Halverson. He's the logical choice. They're good pieces. I'm not talking about romantic nationalist. He didn't know what he was doing. Romantic nationalist. He used folk tunes and they just sustain it. Not at all. Not a bit. He was really, really on top of his game. And it's wonderful stuff. So give Halverson a try. I mean, he's known for one piece now. He's a one-shot wonder, the entry of the Boyars or something like that. I don't know, one of these little march thingies. But there's so much more to him than that. And it's substantial music and beautiful, wonderful, warm, romantic, gorgeous, luscious, yummy music. So he's definitely somebody who should be making a comeback. And it's kind of tragic that Norwegian ensembles and artists are not championing him more, largely because his style is considered passé. Well, screw that. If that's passé, call me passé. So after that, we've talked about this guy a bit. László Lajtha, the great Hungarian symphonist, from the first half of the 20th century. His dates were 1892 to 1963. His music was ruthlessly suppressed by the communist regime because he was sympathetic to the Hungarian Revolution of 1956. But thank God he had a wonderful French publisher, and his stuff is all available. His music is heavily influenced by Impressionism and Hungarian folk music. And, I always wondered as I was growing up, going through the index of composers. Kodály wrote one symphony, Bartók wrote none. Then there was Dohnányi, who, left but wrote two sort of big things. Who was the modern Hungarian symphonist? Well, this is your guy. There are 9 symphonies plus some other works that you could call symphony, and I've talked about them. There are a couple of videos about Lajtha's music, which you can watch and hear some samples, and it's all been recorded, and it's just great. Absolutely great. He's a discovery, somebody to really get into. So after Lajtha, let's see, and I gave you his dates. Henry Cowell, the American composer, yay! 1897 to 1965. Cowell is impossible to pigeonhole. Cowell began life as a wild avant-garde composer, mostly for the inside of the piano, and I've done a talk on his The Banshee, and there are a couple wonderful Cowell discs on Naxos of some of his earlier avant-garde pieces. They're marvelously fun to listen to. I mean, really, really enjoyable. And then he was interested in world music, the music of everywhere. He wrote an Icelandic symphony, he wrote an Indian symphony, he wrote lots of symphonies. I think there's more than 20 of them, and very few have been recorded. And then he did a series of hymn and fuguing tunes based on William Billings and early American music. And he was at Darmstadt. I mean, he did everything. Music just sort of flew out of him. And all of the music that I've heard by him has been interesting and worth hearing. Has it all great? Who knows? But it deserves to be heard, and it deserves to be somehow organized, systematized. I mean, somebody needs to devote some serious time to him. He needs a series of his best stuff to really, make the impression that he deserves. He just deserves it. He's just was an important voice, especially in modern music. He ceaselessly promoted other people. He was the most selfless guy in the world. I mean, he published music. He ran the Modern Music Journal. He did everything he could to try and get contemporary music a firm foundation in the U.S. and in the rest of the world. Just a remarkable guy. There's a very good biography of him, by the way, which you should read if you're curious about what he did. Unfortunately, it doesn't really talk about the music as much as it should. There is a thematic catalog of his stuff, and it's like there's a lot of stuff, really a lot of stuff. But just a remarkable guy, and almost completely self-taught in all the ways that matter. He did have some instruction, but he was dirt poor. He grew up in California, living with his mother, who was quite the strong-willed and crazy person. So his life was weird, and so was he in many ways. So the music is just free. It's total freedom and the ability to do anything you wanted, and he did, and it's a marvelous thing. He's just somebody to keep in your head, keep in mind, look for his stuff, listen to it when you can, and wait until somebody really gets a grip on it and gives it serious attention. So after Henry Cowell, here's a name that you know, and he gets played constantly, but I think he needs to come back. Paul Hindemith. Hindemith was considered for many years the great German composer of the first half of the 20th century, who was not a Second Viennese school type person. I mean, there was Hindemith. He was stuck up there with Hindemith. There was Bartók with Shostakovich, with the great Russians, and then there was Hindemith, the Hindemith. And nowadays he gets very little love. Now, there are works that are repertory pieces. There's the Band Symphony, for example. There's Matthäus der Maler and Nobilissima Visione, the ballet suite. There are pieces that have entered the repertoire, the Symphonic Metamorphosis on themes by Weber. Everybody acknowledges them as 20th century masterpieces. But I still don't think he has earned sufficient respect for what he did, because he wrote lots of music, and really good music, and a lot of stuff that never gets performed. And he's not taken as seriously as he used to be, because, of course, like so many German composers, he had a system, and the system, was what it was. And as soon as people decided the system is no longer, contemporary enough, it's disregarded, and you tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But forget about the system. Just listen to the music. And there are wonderful, wonderful works. I mean, we haven't heard, for example, his violin concerto was recorded by everybody. Oistrakh, Stern, it was popular. And now, nothing. His cello concerto is beautiful. His clarinet concerto is lots of fun. His piano concertos are marvelous. There's a whole bunch of them. Every so often something pops out. But he's not seen in his entirety. And he wrote everything. He wrote stuff for everybody. And I just think he deserves more respect than he's getting. And that's why I put him on the list. So there you go. After Hindemith, Alfredo Casella. This is one of the composers I need to do more of, like William Grant still. Because Casella was the greatest of that group of Italian composers around, Respighi, Malipiero, Ghedini, those guys. And Casella was the best of them, I really think. He began life as a disciple of Mahler. Mahler got him a publisher. They were close, and he made the piano transcription of like Mahler's Seventh Symphony and whatnot. He arranged the premiere of Mahler's Second Symphony in Paris. He was a tireless advocate of contemporary music. Then he became a neoclassicist. Now, Casella's dates were, 1895 to 1960. No, that was Hindemith, sorry, 1895 to 63. Casella was 1883 to 1947. And he was ignored because, like so many Italian composers of the day, he was fairly kind and sympathetic to Mussolini when Mussolini originally took power. And so he got entangled in the whole fascist thing, as most of those composers did. And politically, he was persona non grata for a long time. But there is a terrific series of his music on Chandos, including his early Mahlerian-style symphonies, and another equally fine one on Naxos, which contains amazing stuff, and I'm going to be covering more of that. That's to come. Believe me, I've been saving him because I just think he's really cool. And his later, more neoclassical pieces, have developed an entirely original style that's absolutely splendid, joyous and wonderful to listen to, and full of musical substance. You can sink your teeth into them, and they're delightful to listen to. It's wonderful, wonderful music. And so Casella definitely deserves tons more attention in concert. Fortunately, he has received it on disc, so we're in good shape as far as that goes. And after Casella, we have George Lloyd, whose music I've been pushing all forever, absolutely forever. Lloyd lived from, I have here 1813. Well, it's 1913. That's a mistake. Let me fix that while I can. That's just silly. I have him right here. 1983? No, 1913. There we go. No, that was Casella. What am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, I'll fix that too. So 1913 to 1998. Quite recent. Now, Lloyd is a tremendous symphonist. An amazing symphonist. He wrote 12 wonderful symphonies. He wrote a bunch of other gorgeous orchestral pieces. He wrote some beautiful choral works. He was really a vocal guy. He really wanted to do operas. His father was, an Italian opera nut. And so that was how Lloyd was sort of prepped. But that's not how it turned out. And his symphonies are glorious, one of the great symphonic legacies of the 20th century. And you can hear stuff of his that I've talked about previously. So I don't need to go into this in ridiculous detail, but I will say one thing. He's an interesting study in why composers don't get what they deserve, because his style was avowedly romantic and tonal for the most part, and he was, his concerti and things are also listenable and enjoyable right off the bat, but also quite sophisticated and beautifully contemporary in their ambience. You can't mistake them for earlier music, even though his inspiration is sometimes quite obvious. It's like Berlioz and Tchaikovsky and people like that. But, I was talking to him once because I arranged the premiere and played in the premiere of his Fifth Symphony in the U.S., the U.S. premiere, at the same time that he premiered it in the U.K., just shortly afterwards. And I remember speaking to him, and he was so angry because he'd been getting wonderful reviews and people were really getting behind him. And then he was told, after he wrote these pieces, The Vigil of Venus and this Symphonic Mass, and they were reviewed in Gramophone lukewarmly, I would say. It was one of those say nothing English reviews, where you come away not knowing whether it was good or bad because everything is this. So he said to me, he was told that the directive had gone out from Gramophone to take him down a peg because he had been receiving too much favorable attention. And I don't know if it's true. I don't, these rumors go around the classical music world, but that's what he told me. And I can believe it, actually, because there's this sort of perverse notion of equity in this business, where if you say something nice, you have to say something bad, because that's how your credibility is maintained. And I think that's just bullshit. I mean, that's wrong. Good music is good music, and you have to say it. If it's bad, it's bad. If it's good, it's good. If a guy is writing a series of fabulous pieces, he wrote a series of fabulous pieces. Good for him. You don't just arbitrarily decide that one day it's good and one day it's not, just so that you can appear to be equitable. The whole thing it makes my skin crawl, frankly. And he really deserved as much popular attention, because here was a guy whose music should be played and would be played, and if it is played, people will love it. And what the hell is wrong with that? Especially if it's this good and enjoyable and well written and colorful and tuneful. I mean, it's not a crime to be enjoyable. And Lloyd, it's such a sickness in the classical music world that we would deny somebody that. Out of what? Out of jealousy, out of some perverse notion of a professional something or other? I mean, it's crazy. So forget that. Lloyd is great. And after Lloyd, let's see, Erkki Melartin, 1875 to 1937, Finnish romantic composer. Everything I've heard by him has been lovely, absolutely lovely. It is, some people say, not original, like Sibelius's original. Well, no, it isn't. And that's fine. It's just good romantic music, and we can always use more good romantic music. And he wrote 6 symphonies, and those have been recorded. They're on Undine. We really need better recordings of them. The recordings that exist, I've said this before, they're good. They give you a sense of what the music is, but they need to be played by great orchestra and re-recorded in better sound, and we can really see what's there, because they look like they have a lot of potential to be extremely interesting. Not just more romantic stuff, but something more. And he needs to be explored in greater depth. And that's one of the problems with these unknown composers. You get 1 or 2 records or a series of something with sort of second-tier performances, and that's it. And so it whets the appetite. We know that it's out there, but someone needs to deal with it systematically. So, yes, Erkki Melartin deserves more attention. 2 more to go, guys. We're almost there. Don Gillis. Goodness, he's wonderful. I love Don Gillis. Don Gillis is the quintessential American symphonist from the first half of the 20th century. His dates were 1912 to 1978. I mean, he was longer than that, but he wrote more than a dozen symphonies. He's famous for one tiny work, Symphony Number 5 1/2, a light piece the symphony for fun. His music has a kind of wide-eyed, patriotic American innocence that is going to get laughed off the face of the earth. I mean, we're all so way too sophisticated. His symphonies have nicknames like the Pioneers and, Prairie Home Companion, or, he was from Texas, and it has that, naivete, I guess is the word. He just is. And it is what it is. It's completely sincere, honest, wonderful music, and it makes me crazy because you idiots in American orchestras play this stuff. We should have our own school of composers. At least if the rest of the world isn't going to do it, we should do it. I mean, we should be playing Gillis. We should be playing William Grant Still. We should be playing Henry Cowell. We should be playing these people regularly, so they don't have to be necessarily the second half. You can have a famous soloist too, but there's no excuse not to be doing this stuff. If they can do Elgar and Vaughan Williams in the UK till the cows come home, then we can do these composers. They're just as good. They're just as worthy. And even if they're not, they're ours. Well, I mean, let's enjoy them. Let's enjoy what we have. Okay, that's my rant. Now, however, there is one composer who I think absolutely needs to be completely, totally, utterly rehabilitated. And it's in the works. The mechanism is in the works. Will it happen? I have no idea. It's Boccarini. Boccarini was a fabulous composer and a major composer. He wrote scads of music. There's like 100 string quartets and 100 string quintets, but it's all instrumental music. He was fascinatingly an Italian composer who wasn't known for writing opera vocal music. I mean, there's the Stabat Mater, there's a bunch of arias, there's like a zarzuela. That's about it for his vocal music. But he was such an important and listenable, wonderful, wonderful link in the evolution of the classical style. I mean, Haydn respected him. He was contemptuously referred to as the wife of Haydn because his music is admittedly less muscular, more rococo. And so what? It's really good music. He was a master of texture, of sonority. He was a chord guy. He was not a line guy. He wasn't a contrapuntal guy. He gets crapped on because he's Italian, and because Italian composers are not supposed to be able to write in abstract or instrumental forms. And this is only true because they're not German necessarily forms. They are Italian or Boccherinian. They're his own. But if you take him seriously and if you treat his art as something which is, original to him, and you understand it and you pay attention to it, it's fabulous. It's just fabulous. It's gorgeous and sensual and sexy and just beautiful. And it's a wonderful alternative to the German school. A legitimate alternative to the German school. It's not that one is better than the other. This isn't a zero-sum game. I'm thinking of it from the other way. The fact that he's derided because he's not German, or he didn't write in later classical forms. He preceded Haydn and many of these composers in writing quartets and quintets and all of these chamber pieces that later became, linchpins of the classical style. He did them earlier, and he was in Vienna. And he was a friend of Gluck. He played cello, in the Viennese theater orchestras. He was exposed to all of this stuff before he wound up in Spain for most of his career, writing just scads of fabulous classical period chamber music and 30-some-odd beautiful symphonies that are quite different from anyone else's symphonies of the period, but still completely characteristic and personal. And there is a Boccherini complete edition in the works. It'll probably be 100 years before it's finished, but the music is starting to come out, and it should be recorded and played, and it should not be played on period instruments because his music requires vibrato, it requires warmth and texture and a rich sonority. That's what he was at. And frankly, the period style is almost antithetical to his aesthetic. Frankly, it really is. I mean, or unless those people start deperiodizing themselves and start playing real music that's lyrical and vocal and full of warmth and a singing tone. And his scores are meticulously marked with lots of performance indications. He's a fascinating study and a marvelous composer. And so his dates were 1773 to 1805. No, it's earlier than that. I have to get these dates. I'm going to get these dates all fixed up, and you'll see them down below. Because I don't know what I was thinking when I saw these. Not 1773. That doesn't make any sense at all. It's way earlier than that. It was 1713 or something. But I'll figure it out and clean it all out and stick them down below, and you can look at them. But he's great. He's absolutely great. Those are the 15. And take a look and take a listen and check out some of the other videos. And keep on listening, friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.